Hey, welcome to I AM Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and just like any other time, we have another special guest today. Man, we're going to my family. My family. I have family in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so it's gonna be a great
Oh,
show
I didn't know that.
for us. And small. Now I had to just do this. I actually went to Washington Community College. So
Oh, wow.
talking about a small world here. I
Very,
went to Washington
there,
Technical Middle College, and that's right there in Ann Arbor. So
there
I'm gonna
is.
have
Yeah.
fun with our guest today, Susan B. Miller. She has a book that we're gonna be talking about. By the way, I love you, and she has a very impressive resume. I'm not going to spend 20 minutes on it, but just give you a sneak peek. She lives in Ann Arbor she works as a clinical psychologist. She is author of several novels that we'll learn more about, and she has a special promo that's going to go through, and y'all have time because by the time this comes out, y'all will have more than enough time to take advantage of that promo deal. So we're going to talk about that book, but also the fact that she has a great message for our audience. So without further ado, I just want to welcome Susan to the show and say how you doing today.
Thank you, Shamaya. I'm doing well today, and I'm happy to be talking with you. I think are you in Texas, or did I get that?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
I am in San
Okay.
Antonio,
Okay.
Texas.
So,
Small world is I grew up in Michigan. My dad worked for
okay.
Chrysler, so very small world. But
And my dad spent some time in San Antonio in the
what?
Army Air Force many, many years ago. So there you go.
Wow. Lightning don't strike twice, man. So
Right.
that's a great insight right there. So first and foremost, kind of share with the audience a little bit about your professional background being a clinical psychologist, and we'll lead to the book.
Yes, I am a clinical psychologist, have been doing that work for many years. I was educated here at the University of Michigan, um, and have a private practice where I see people with quite a range of presenting issues. So it's been a long career that I've enjoyed a great deal, and it's been a nice mix of the psychology work and the writing, and a real pleasure and a nice opportunity for me that I've been able to blend the two.
When you look at the books you've been able to publish so far, how has your professional work and experience helped you decide on what you wanted to write on and how you wrote it?
Yeah. Well, actually, the majority of the books that I've published have been psychology books, not fiction, although I would have to say I think the majority of the books that I've written have been fiction. So what that tells you is that the fiction uh, is very challenging and has been somewhat more difficult to publish than the psychology books. That's probably part of why right now I'm focusing more on fiction because it's been the higher mountain to climb for me. Um, Although it was also my first love, before I even knew what the word psychology meant, I think I was interested in fiction, which isn't so surprising because in a sense, most children love stories, and so most of us, I think, are drawn to stories from an early age. But I think there has also been some cross-fertilization between the two fields of study, which I've thought about a bit in that, uh, probably people who want to write fiction and people who enjoy being a psychologist or some other kind of therapist are those who are quite intrigued by and drawn to just human personalities, right? So both fiction and a therapist's office are full of characters in a sense and stories. So the two really seem like a pretty natural fit. And of course, doing therapy, you do hear so many stories, and not only do you hear stories, but you see the makeup of individuals, not just their stories, but their faces and their gestures and the way their speech patterns. So there's so many elements of that experience that can nurture work as a fiction writer?
Listen, I'll be focused right watching us on YouTube, and we're talking to our guest, Susan B. Miller. Let's unpack the strategy of the book that you wrote, By the Way, I Love You. The character, Leslie, she embarks on her freshman year at U of M, and her mom dies of cancer. She has to deal with a lot of, real life happening, not just
Right.
the whole deal of making friends and dealing with frenemies, but also selling through her awkwardness of dating. Kind of set the tone of what was the goal with developing the character of Leslie.
Yeah. Leslie actually started from somebody that I had worked with some years ago. It was actually a young man because I, uh, well, the character evolved, but I also wanted to be very careful about privacy, confidentiality. So I didn't want the starting point of the character to be recognizable in any way. So I had been working with somebody, though, who was starting college and had lost a parent early in life. And it was interesting, and it was also extremely moving to see how this person was sort of bringing with them into the beginnings of their adult life so much pain and uncertainty that was pretty deeply buried about the early relationship with this parent who was in some ways not even well remembered. So that's where it started, just thinking about the things that people bring with them into adulthood that so impact those efforts that everybody makes to make friends or to kind of make an identity for yourself in the new adult world, whether you're going to college or, going to the military or just moving from one city to another to start an adult life. There's a real challenge there that's pretty universal, but individual challenges depending on the road, the person has traveled. And as I've been thinking about this book, this book actually is uh, it's kind of pegged for a little bit more of a young adult audience, although it could be of interest to an adult as well. But I was noticing how many of the things that I've written, including some of the nonfiction, had that young adult, at the center. Um, for example, I had written a psychology book, the only book that's kind of a self-help book, and it was called When Parents Have Problems, and it's for older teenagers or very young adults who have a troubled parent. So a lot of things had been written for parents who think their kids are a big problem and don't know how to deal with their kids. But in this case, I was thinking about the kids whose parents are a big problem. Maybe it could be alcoholism or it could be a mental illness or just a parent who's very unreliable, dishonest. So I was trying to speak to those kids. And so there are a few examples of different things that I've written. So I think I'm drawn to that age and the voices of people who are either older teens or young adults.
And in the book, she has to address the problem. The elephant in the room is her letting people inside and
Yeah, it
touch on
is.
that.
Yeah. And I think for a number of reasons, she's struggling with a number of aspects of her relationship with her mother. So one question she has is really who was she to her mother? Because her mother could be kind of remote, have like a Mona Lisa face, hard to read. So she wasn't certain that her mother had really deeply loved her. So there's one challenge, making it hard for her to trust others and trust their affection for her. But the other side of the coin was that she had a lot of feelings that she actually hadn't cared well for her mother as her mother became ill and then died. Um, Leslie was a teenager. She was very testy and rude and, not very available, not nice to her mother, which isn't uncommon in adolescence, but most people have an opportunity later to mend and to re-strengthen those relationships. But she didn't have that. So her sense was that she had failed her mother and maybe her mother had failed her. So she's sort of working with both these sides of the coin.
When you look at the impact of the relationship between the mom, how did you in the book kind of illustrate that being something that's almost like a thorn in her side? Like, how I have to deal with others, how much of that catered towards how I looked at my mom versus how she might have looked at me or how I perceived how she might have looked at me.
Yeah, well, I guess there are another number of threads. One has to do with other mothers she encounters because she has a roommate who has a mother who's very present. And then other friends who have their mothers. So she's reacting as she sees these other relationships and then thinking about her own history. She has old letters from her mother, so she starts nervously looking at those and trying to make sense of them, goes to her father for help with that. And then as the story evolves, there's a new thread. Um, she actually is directed to, well, not sure how much of the story to tell, but she's directed to a piece of undeveloped wild land that she starts to really feel deep affection for an attachment to. So in a sense, it becomes her mother nature. She feels very nourished by this place. But then she discovers that it's under threat from a developer. So in a sense, she's replaying her experience with her mother because now, again, she's got a mother that's threatened, not by cancer, but by this big development that's going to come through. So she then is challenged to see if she can find a way to speak up, go to city meetings, city council, and planning commissions, and give voice to the value of the land and express the wish that it not be leveled. So it's, in a sense, it's her second chance to defend her mother, Mother Earth in this case, but in doing it, she has to rethink her own identity. Is she somebody who can speak up, who has a voice, who can have enough confidence in herself, who can challenge herself, all these things? Or is she going to fail again and just say, okay, level the land, I won't do anything? So through that encounter, and she meets lots of friends and some older people, kind of advisors who interact with her around this project of trying to protect this land.
Once again, listen to and watching Unrefocused Radio here on YouTube and on wherever you get the podcast. We're talking to our special guest, Susan B. Miller. You go to her website, susanbethmiller.com. We're talking about the book you can get on Amazon. By the way, I love you. And real quick, before I forget, when this show is wrapped up,
Mhm.
you said in the green room that you have a special promo period for people to take advantage of. So if you can kind of explain what that is and how people can do this probably after they eat some turkey.
Okay. Yes, for 5 days, supposed to be starting on Thanksgiving. The book will be a free download for this is for ebook readers um on Amazon. And truthfully, now it's $2.99, so it's not a fortune, but it'll be zero for 5 days. Of course, you can get if you like to read a physical book, you can here, I can show you, you can uh, buy that anytime, but it is a free download for 5 days. And of course, I would love for people to read it. And if you have anything you want to say about it, you can write a review or you can send me an email and I'll respond.
Going back a little bit to being a clinical psychologist, uh, being able to interact with different personalities, different people of ages, backgrounds.
Mhm.
What do you think is something that people appreciate the most when they are experiencing your service? Is it listening to their story? Is it trying to navigate pain points from your professional perspective? What has been something you see people gravitate towards?
Though both those things are important, I think the fundamental thing that you first need to establish when you start working with person is just that you're present, you're interested in them, you're listening. I think it's also very important to be honest, a fair broker, somebody who's going to tell them the truth if they're asking for feedback on their own behavior or if they're asking something about you. Uh, so that honesty is important in building trust. And then from there, uh, I think it's important to people that you can perceive things about them that maybe they've had a pretty hard time getting to on their own. Um, Sometimes because of fear or just not, in a way, not knowing how to listen to themselves. So, that kind of interaction will help a person travel to places that they haven't been able to go on their own.
You mentioned earlier about confidence, and I think that that's a good point to be made because how would you the character you develop in your book, by the way, I love you. What do you believe was her biggest struggle as far as how she looked at herself and not just the struggle of letting people inside, but
Mhm.
overcoming her past issues?
She definitely was lacking in confidence, and that would show often in her being extremely sarcastic and pushing people away, even hurting them a little bit to get them to run away from her. So she did have to recognize that she was hurting people and at the same time hurting herself, out of her fear of any kind of vulnerability. And as she moves along, she's more willing, step by step, slowly, to be honest with people, including about her own caring about them and her valuing of the way that they care for her.
And
So
since
that seemed to be her biggest struggle.
and since the characteristics of this character was kind of inspired by true life events, would you say that individuals that you had to study and learn more about, is there a common thread of people who feel like the lack of confidence is something that they've been used to the point that they get to that level of how can I just keep everybody shut out?
Uh, yeah, it's not such an uncommon thing, although often people aren't too aware of what they do. Some people, there's a range, some people are, even when they're doing things that are self-harmful, they kind of know what they're doing. They just feel compelled to do it anyway. And some people don't recognize quite what they're doing. Maybe they're disrupting friendships and they don't know why people are backing away from them or disappointing them.
When
But
you
confidence, lack of confidence, a pretty common human challenge.
And that was going to be my question. When you came up with the title of the book, by the way, I love you. That's a very interesting title because is it from a perspective that, oh, beyond all this stuff, like how I'm acting and,
Yeah, yeah.
reacting, by the way, I love you. But it's like, well, geez, you got
I
to
have to
show
say,
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And she's you have to say it as an aside, not directly, but by the way. But I had the title was hard to come up with. The publisher and I were back and forth a lot, and they actually had chosen this title, and I wasn't quite on board, but I trusted them in certain areas that they were more experienced than I was, or maybe had a better finger on the pulse of certain things. So in the end, I was, by the way, I trust you. You can pick the title.
That's
So,
good.
yeah.
So before we wrap up, my next question would be: do you believe that's how all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we can sometimes be in that position where we're kind of like attitude is, oh, by the way, I love you, but actions don't always lead up to the words we say.
Yeah, and human beings, adults tend to we do try and protect ourselves more than little children don't do that much until they've gotten hurt some. Adults are more cautious and do um, find it difficult often to be vulnerable, but it's also important to be able to be vulnerable at times.
And as a professional, being a clinical psychologist, what do you hope that readers will be able to learn from the character Leslie, and also just the perspective of writing from a lens of a psychologist?
I don't think too much about lessons when I'm writing, but I suppose just that growing up, it's a journey, right? It's not easy. It's not, sometimes people have vision of going to college and everything is wonderful and perfect, and occasionally that happens, but a lot of times it's a struggle. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of uh, hurdles, and you got to just keep working at it.
My last question will be: when you think about emotions and how people deal with their emotions, especially from a professional in the work that you do, how important is it for people to understand their emotions better so that they can probably better manage
Yeah,
not just
yeah,
self awareness, but just how they treat people?
sure. Yeah, I think that is so important, and for everyone, every human being, the more you can understand about your emotions, the richer your experiences. And maybe one thought for people is, when you can, try and be curious about your own emotions before you judge them, because I think we tend to judge our emotions. This one is a bad feeling. I'm going to try and not feel it, or I'm going to pretend somebody else is feeling it, not me, project it onto someone else. So if you can take a position of curiosity more than judgment, it enables you to explore and learn. Once you judge, you kind of stop learning because you're just trying to get your distance from this bad experience or the experience you've labeled as bad.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you can, be curious, try and learn about yourself. You don't really gain anything from the judgment.
Well, once again, been listening and watching on Refocused Radio and talking to our guest today, Susan B. Miller. Go to her website, susanbethmiller.com. Get her book on Amazon. By the way, I love you. And don't forget, on Thanksgiving Day, there's a special deal. I mean, come on, you can't pass that up. All the information will be in the description. But like always, I want to say thanks to our guest, Susan, for your time.
Thank you, Shemaya. It was a pleasure.